The hyena's ears swiveled first, catching a frequency the wind had carried for half a mile. She stopped mid-stride, one paw hovering above the grass, and tested the air with a long, slow inhale. Somewhere ahead, hidden in a thicket of storm-felled acacia, 3 newborn cubs lay blind and mewing against their mother's flank. The lioness had chosen this den with care, a hollow beneath roots where the earth still held the cool of night. But milk leaves a scent that moves on the breeze like a confession, and the hyena had found the thread of it. She did not howl. She did not signal. She simply turned her head toward the thicket and stood very still, counting the seconds of silence that answered her. The most dangerous thing a lioness can do is hide her cubs in the grass she trusts. A den feels safe because it is hidden. A shallow scrape beneath fallen branches, a cave of roots, a stand of reeds that bends with the wind and shows nothing. For the first weeks of their lives, the cubs are almost helpless. Their eyes open late, their legs buckle, their cries are thin and constant, and every cry, every shift of the mother's warm body, leaks scent into the surrounding air. Hyenas do not track silence. They track the smell of milk, and they are patient. A clan can pass within yards of a hidden den and feel nothing, or they can catch one thread of that scent and stop, and the entire calculus of the savannah changes in a breath. This is the story of one such den, one lioness, and the long hours before the clan finds what she has tried to bury. It is not a story of a fight, though there will be one. It is not a story of a rescue, because in the wild there is no rescue. It is a story of arithmetic, of how many mouths, how many strides, how much distance between a mother and the thing that wants her cubs dead. Watch how she moves. Watch how she measures the wind, because the hyena has already begun to count too. The lioness left the den at dusk, when the heat of the day had broken and the shadows ran long across the savannah. She had not eaten properly in days. The last hunt had yielded little, and what she had taken she had swallowed quickly, standing over the carcass with her ears flat, listening for the approach of other mouths. Now her ribs showed faintly beneath her coat, and her milk was thin. The cubs suckled with a desperate urgency, their small paws kneading her belly, their eyes still sealed shut. She let them feed for a long time, her head turned toward the open grass, her nostrils flaring at each pulse of wind. When she finally rose, she did it slowly, unhooking each cub from her teats with a gentle nudge of her muzzle. They protested in thin, creaking mews, but she did not relent. She stepped out of the den and stood in the open, her coat dark with shadow, and she began to move through the grass in a wide, deliberate circle. This was not wandering. This was a survey, a check of every scent trail, every flattened blade, every shift in the wind's direction. She was reading the landscape the way a keeper reads a ledger, looking for anything that did not belong. The hyena's scent was still there, faint but present, a sour note on the evening air. The lioness did not chase it. She simply noted it and turned back toward the den. Here is the first thing most people misunderstand about a lioness with cubs. She is not brave. Bravery implies a choice, a weighing of options. A lioness does what the body demands. She feeds, she hides, she moves, she waits. There is no calculation of risk versus reward. There is only the constant, unrelenting pressure of survival and the knowledge that every hour she spends away from the den is an hour the cubs are unprotected. She returns to them with her jaw stained dark from the carcass, her belly full for now, and she settles into the hollow with a long, shuddering exhale. The cubs smell her before she touches them. They crawl toward the heat of her body, and she lowers her head, and the night closes in around them. But inside the den, the sound changed. Not a cry, not a threat, just a shift in the rhythm of her breathing. The lioness had heard something beyond the grass, a low, grinding chuckle that carried no warmth. It was distant, maybe 200 yards, but it was unmistakable. Hyenas vocalize in a frequency that cuts through the noise of the night, and once you have heard it, you do not mistake it for anything else. She lifted her head, her ears rotating forward, and she held absolutely still for a long count of heartbeats. The chuckle came again, closer this time, followed by the soft pad thud of multiple feet moving through the grass. The clan was not hunting. They were patrolling, moving along a familiar route, marking territory, listening for the sound of prey or the scent of a kill. A single hyena might pass within yards of the den and never know it was there. A clan of 8 or 10 moves differently. They spread out, their heads low, their noses working the ground in overlapping sweeps. They are not looking for a den. They are looking for something weaker than them, anything that can be pulled apart and eaten. A lioness alone with blind cubs is exactly the kind of weakness they have learned to find. The lioness did not move. She had heard the clan pass many times before, on other nights, in other seasons, and she knew that panic was a signal, a sudden movement, a sharp scent of fear. These were the things that made a patrol stop and turn. So she stayed still, her body flattened against the den floor, her tail pressed tight against her side, and she waited for the sounds to fade. The chuckle came once more. Then the pad thud grew fainter, and the night settled back into its usual rhythm. She exhaled. The cubs, who had gone quiet at her stillness, began to nurse again. She carries the weight of past litters in each breath and pause. If you want to witness more of these quiet calculations, subscribe and let the story continue unfolding. In the comments, share a single word that captures what you saw in that stillness. Patience, listening, memory, or something else. This is the discipline that keeps a litter alive. It is not dramatic. It does not make for a single second of spectacle. It is hour after hour of listening, of measuring the wind, of judging when to move and when to freeze. The lioness had done this with her previous litters, those that survived and those that did not. She carried the memory of both, in the way she held her body low in the grass, in the way she never slept for more than minutes at a stretch, in the way her eyes tracked the movement of every distant shape for hours at a time. The mother does not rest. She only pauses. The cubs were born in the dark, in the hollow beneath the acacia roots, in a nest she had lined with dry grass and the soft down of old kills. She had licked each one clean as it arrived, biting through the sack, clearing the tiny nostrils, pressing her tongue over each wet flank until the fur stood up in damp spikes. There were 3 of them, 2 females and a male, though this distinction meant nothing to her. What mattered was that they breathed, and that they latched, and that they stayed close to the warmth of her body during the cold hours before dawn. For the first 2 days, she did not leave the den at all. The cubs fed constantly, their small bellies swelling and emptying in a rhythm that seemed to leave no room for anything else. She lay on her side, her head propped on her forelegs, her eyes half closed, and she listened to the sounds of the savannah beyond the roots. The lions of her pride were gone, driven off by a coalition of younger males that had taken over the territory weeks before she gave birth. She had seen the fight from a distance, heard the roars roll across the plain, and had slipped away with her belly already heavy. She knew what would happen if the new males found her cubs. She had watched it happen to other females, on other territories, and the memory of it was a cold stone in her chest. Now she was alone. No sisters to help guard the den, no coalition males to drive off a hyena patrol. There was only her, and the hollow beneath the roots, and the endless arithmetic of survival. She had chosen this thicket precisely because it was far from the pride's usual range, far enough that the new males would not stumble upon it by chance, close enough to water that she could slip out and drink and return before the cubs began to cry. The cost of this isolation was that she could not rely on anyone else. The benefit was that no one else knew where she was, or so she believed. But the hyena had smelled the milk, and though she had moved on with her patrol, she had not forgotten. The scent of a nursing female is not like the scent of a kill. It is quieter, more diffuse, but it is also specific. It tells a predator that somewhere nearby there is a mother who cannot move quickly, cannot fight effectively, cannot do anything but stand between her young and the teeth that want them. It is not a scent that a hyena discards. It is a scent that gets filed away, tested against the wind, revisited. The clan would be back. The only question was when. The lioness seemed to know this without knowing it. She stirred from the den at midnight, leaving the cubs in the hollow, and walked a slow, silent circuit through the grass around her territory. She marked the perimeter with urine, scratching the earth with her hind claws, leaving a warning that any animal with a functioning nose would read. She did this every night, in every direction, and each time she returned to the den, she checked the cubs first, touching her nose to each one before she settled. The ritual was not a choice. It was the only thing she knew how to do. The first sign of real trouble came on the third morning, with the sun still low and the grass wet with dew. The lioness had just returned from drinking at a waterhole half a mile away, her muzzle still damp, when she caught the scent of hyena confidence in the air. Not a patrol this time, but a small group moving with purpose, their heads up, their calls short and directed. She froze at the edge of the thicket, her body half turned toward the den, and she listened. The sounds were coming from the east, from the direction of the open plain. She counted the voices. 4, maybe 5. Not a full clan, but enough to matter. She had a choice, a real one, the kind that the word bravery might apply to. She could slip back into the den, flatten herself against the cubs, and hope the hyenas passed by on their way to something else. Or she could go out to meet them, present herself at the edge of the thicket, and show them that the den was defended. The first option risked them finding the scent and closing in. The second risked them seeing the movement and realizing the den was there. She stood for a long moment, her tail twitching, and then she moved, not toward the den, but away from it, out into the open grass, where the hyenas could see her. What came next had no sound. She walked, unhurried, into the path of the approaching hyenas, her head level with her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the middle of the group. She did not growl, she did not charge. She simply placed herself between them and the thicket and held their gaze with the flat, unblinking attention of something that does not intend to move. The hyenas stopped. They looked at her. They looked at each other. And then, with a collective snort that was half disdain and half calculation, they turned and continued their patrol, angling wide around her position. She held her ground until they were out of sight, then turned and walked back to the den, on legs that trembled slightly beneath her. The cubs were still asleep, their small bodies heaped against each other in the warm hollow. She lowered herself over them, and for a long time she did not close her eyes. She lay awake, listening to the wind, listening for the sound of the hyenas to change. It did not. The morning passed. The cubs woke and fed. The heat of the day settled over the thicket, and the world went quiet. The lioness did not sleep then either. She dozed in the way that large carnivores doze, in fragments, with her ears half open, attuned to the smallest disturbance in the rhythm of the grass. A rustle that was too regular, a pause in the insect drone, a shift in the pattern of bird calls. Each of these things registered at the edge of her awareness, and each was filed away and judged. Nothing was serious enough to make her rise, but nothing was fully dismissed either. She was waiting, as she had been waiting her whole life, for a thing she knew must come. The day wore on. The cubs grew stronger, their eyes beginning to open, their legs beginning to hold them for a few seconds before they flopped. The lioness licked each one thoroughly, her tongue working the fur into clean, dry spikes, and she let them crawl over her in the late afternoon light. It was the first time she had allowed them out of the hollow, and she did it only in the deep shade of the thicket, where the branches still held the shadow. She watched them stumble and wobble, and she watched the edge of the grass beyond them, and she did not let her eyes drift from the horizon for more than a moment. This is the quiet discipline that this channel exists to record. No commentary, no sentiment, only the raw fact of a mother's attention. Subscribe to join the small group of witnesses who watch these unbroken moments unfold. Comment one word. What do you call the state she is in as she scans the grass? Vigilance, patience, or something else entirely? Here is the thing about a mother's stillness. It is not an absence of action. It is a concentration of attention so total that movement becomes impossible. The lioness was not doing nothing. She was doing the most demanding thing a predator can do. Waiting without letting her guard drop, watching without blinking, holding her body in a state of readiness that burned calories and wired her nerves. The cubs played. The wind blew. The sun moved across the sky, and the lioness remained a fixed point, an island of attention in the shifting grass, ready to become a wall of teeth and muscle in the half-second it would take for anything to cross the line she had drawn in her own mind. She did not know the hyena clan had circled around to approach from the west. She did not know that a second group had moved into position to the north, cutting off her escape. She knew only that the wind had shifted a few degrees, and that the scent of the savannah had changed. She lifted her head. Her nostrils flared. Her ears rotated forward, then back, then forward again. And beneath her, the cubs, oblivious, continued their clumsy play in the scattered light. The wind carried something else now, something that made her rise from the crouch with a smoothness that startled even herself. The cubs tumbled away from her sudden movement, their tiny mouths opening in confusion, and she herded them back into the hollow with a sweep of her foreleg. Their mews were thin, questioning, but she did not answer them. She stood at the mouth of the den, blocking the entrance completely with her body, and she waited. The hyenas came into view one at a time, not as a charging mob, but as a spread, deliberate line. 5 of them, maybe 6, their heads low, their spotted shoulders rolling with each step. They had stopped making noise. That was the worst sign. A hyena that vocalizes is still deciding. A hyena that goes silent has already made its choice. The line advanced until they were 30 yards out, then 20. Then they stopped and fanned out in a shallow arc, their eyes fixed on the thicket, on the shadow where the lioness stood. She let them look. She let them read her posture, the set of her shoulders, the way her tail hung still instead of lashing. She wanted them to see that she was not afraid, because fear was a scent they could track, a language they understood better than any roar. The lead hyena took a single step forward, testing. The lioness did not move. The hyena took another step, still nothing, a third step, and the lioness dropped her head a fraction of an inch. Not a bow, but a promise, a line drawn in the air that said this far and no further. The hyena held her gaze for a long moment. Then she looked away, at the ground, at the grass, at the sun that was beginning to sink. It was not a surrender. It was an accounting, a quick calculation of what this confrontation would cost and whether the prize was worth it. A den full of cubs is a prize, but a lioness who will not move is a price. The lead hyena turned her head and made a single, low sound. Not a retreat, not a call to attack, just a note of acknowledgement, a recognition that the deal was not worth making today. The line broke. The hyenas turned and walked away, not running, not glancing back, moving with the unhurried confidence of animals who know they can return. They did not go far. They did not leave the territory. They simply moved off a few hundred yards and settled in the shade of a distant termite mound, where they could watch the thicket and wait and remember that a scent of milk had been found here once and would be found again. The lioness watched them go. She did not relax. She did not collapse into the hollow with a sigh of relief. She stood at the mouth of the den for a long, silent minute, counting heads as they moved, memorizing their direction, their gait, the way they held themselves. When they were finally out of sight behind the termite mound, she turned and lowered herself over the cubs, who had gone quiet and still at the first sound of the hyena's approach. They crawled against her, their small bodies trembling with an instinct they did not understand, and she let them nurse. But her head stayed up, her eyes on the gap in the grass, and she did not close them again that day. This is the part of the story that does not appear in the spectacle of a chase. It is the part that happens in the silence after the threat withdraws, when the adrenaline has faded and the body must decide whether to rest or to keep watch. The lioness chose to keep watch. She lay with her chin resting on her forelegs, her ears rotating in slow, rhythmic sweeps, cataloging every sound the savannah made. The hyenas were still there, beyond the termite mound, and she could taste their presence on the air. She did not try to drive them off. She did not have the strength to spare for a fight that would not end with their deaths. She simply held the line and let them know, hour after hour, that the den was not empty and the mother was not sleeping. The cubs grew in those hours. Their eyes opened wider and their legs steadied, and they began to make short, wobbling excursions from the hollow, always under the shadow of the thicket, always within reach of her paw. She let them go, but she never let them stray far. She watched them the way she watched the horizon, with the same flat attention, the same refusal to blink. And when one of the cubs wandered too close to the edge of the grass, she rose and nudged it back with her nose, a movement so quick and so final that there was no room for protest. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from vigilance without rest. It is not the exhaustion of a long run or a heavy kill. It is the exhaustion of holding a single thought in mind for hours, the thought that something is out there, and it has not left, and it will come again. The lioness felt this exhaustion in her bones, in the way her eyelids grew heavy and her limbs grew slow, but she did not give in to it. She had learned, in the seasons of her life, that a mother who sleeps is a mother who loses, so she did not sleep. She lay in the hollow, her body curved around the cubs, and she let her eyes go half-closed, and she let her ears do the work that her eyes could no longer manage. The night passed in fragments. The cubs woke and fed and slept again. The insects sang and fell silent, and sang again. The hyenas shifted positions once, moving around the termite mound to a new patch of shade, and the lioness tracked the sound of their movement without opening her eyes. When the first gray light of dawn began to seep across the sky, she rose, stiff and slow, and she looked out at the savannah. The hyenas were gone. The termite mound was empty. The grass was still. She did not trust it. She knew that the absence of hyenas did not mean the absence of threat. But she also knew that the cubs needed to drink, and that she needed to eat, and that the balance of survival would not hold if she refused to move. She left the den at a walk, her head lowered, her steps deliberate, and she made her way toward the waterhole half a mile away. She drank quickly, deeply, the water cold and sharp in her throat. She did not linger. She did not look for prey. She turned and walked back to the den, and when she arrived, she found the cubs exactly where she had left them, huddled together in the hollow, their eyes open now, watching the mouth of the den with the same flat attention they had learned from her. She held their gaze for a long moment, then lowered herself into the hollow. The cubs pressed against her, their small bodies warm and insistent, and she let them nurse. But her head stayed up, her eyes fixed on the gap in the grass where the hyenas had vanished. She had won this day. She knew the days ahead would not all be won. The milk would thin as the cubs grew, the hunts would lengthen, and the clan would return when the memory of her stillness faded. For now, the thicket held its peace. The wind moved through the acacia roots, carrying the scent of dry earth and old grass. The cubs slept, their flanks rising and falling in the shallow rhythm of young things that have not yet learned what the night can hold. And the lioness lay over them, a living roof of bone and muscle, her eyes half closed but never fully shut. She would rise again at dusk, mark her line again, walk her silent circuit again. This was not a vigil with an end. It was the shape of her life now. The sun climbed, the shadows shortened, the savannah stretched out in every direction, indifferent and vast, holding the den and the termite mound, and the waterhole in the same unblinking light. And in the hollow beneath the roots, the mother breathed, and the cubs breathed with her, and the long arithmetic of survival continued. One day counted, one night measured, one breath held against the silence that had not yet broken. The days after that were a slow education in patience. The cubs learned the borders of the thicket, the texture of the roots, the particular shade of light that meant their mother was returning. She learned their voices, the thin cry of hunger, the sharper mew of discomfort, the quiet grumble of contentment that meant they were full. There was no word for any of this. There was only the constant, wordless negotiation between her body and theirs, a language of warmth and movement and scent that predated any sound. She began to leave them for longer stretches now, not by choice, but by necessity. The hunts took her farther afield, and the kills were leaner, and she returned with less each time. She would eat what she could at the carcass, gulping the meat down in the time it took for a vulture to circle, and then she would carry the rest back in her belly, the only container that could not be stolen. The cubs would smell her arrival before she reached the den, and they would crawl to the mouth of the hollow, their eyes shining in the dark, and she would lower herself so they could feed. This is the law of the den. She returns, she gives, she returns again. Subscribe to stay with her through the coming season when the cubs will test every boundary she has drawn. If you felt the quiet weight of that feeding ritual, write rhythm in the comments. No other word comes closer. There was a rhythm to it, almost a kind of peace. The hyenas did not return. The males did not find the den. The grass grew tall and then bent flat, and the rains came and went, and the cubs grew steadily, their legs firming, their eyes clear, their play becoming rougher and more coordinated. The lioness watched them with the same unblinking attention she had always given the horizon, but now there was something else in the way she held herself, a slight loosening, a hint of slack in the line of her shoulders. Not relief, not trust. Just the faintest acknowledgement that the worst of the first weeks was behind them. If you have ever sat and watched a mother animal teach her young to move, you already know the particular quality of that attention. It is not tender in the way human tenderness is tender. It is precise. It is economical. Every nudge, every correction, every patient repetition of a lesson that will not be learned for weeks. The lioness showed the cubs how to drink, how to lower their heads to the water without falling in, how to test the air with their nostrils before they moved. She did not explain any of this. She simply did it, over and over, while they watched, and gradually, imperfectly, they began to copy her. The first kill she brought them to was not a kill at all. It was the carcass of a wildebeest calf that had died in the mud at the edge of the waterhole, too weak to follow its herd. The lioness had found it at dawn, and she had dragged it, laboriously, back through the grass to the edge of the thicket, her jaws clamped around the neck, her muscles straining with each step. The cubs came out of the den at the smell of blood, their eyes wide, their noses working. They did not know what to do with it. They mouthed at the fur, pawed at the ribs, made small, frustrated sounds, and she lay down beside them, and she tore a strip of meat from the carcass, and she let them watch her chew and swallow and tear another. They learned quickly. Within a week, they could pull the meat themselves, their small teeth finding the soft places, their faces streaked with blood they had not yet learned to clean. The lioness stood over them while they ate, her ears rotating, her eyes on the grass. She did not eat much herself that day. She let them take what they wanted, and she waited. And when they were full and drowsy, she led them back to the den with the same slow, deliberate steps she had used to bring them out. The rains came harder that season, turning the Savannah green and then yellow, filling the waterhole until it spilled over its banks. The lioness moved the cubs twice, first to a new hollow beneath an overhang of rock, then to a shallow den in the lee of a fallen tree where the ground was dry and the roots offered cover. Each move was made at night in the dark, with the cubs in her jaws one at a time, carried gently but firmly, their bodies swinging as she walked. She did not test the new dens before she moved them. She simply chose and moved and settled and began the vigil again. The hyenas were still there, somewhere. She had seen their tracks at the waterhole, read their scent on the wind, heard their distant calls in the hours before dawn, but they had not found the new den. The scent of milk was fainter now, diluted by the cubs' growth, masked by the rain and the green. And the lioness had learned something in the weeks of watching. A hyena's memory is long, but its patience is not infinite. A clan will revisit a place where it found easy prey. It will not wait forever for a scent that has faded. She tested this theory one evening as the light failed and the first stars appeared. She left the cubs in the den and walked openly in the direction of the termite mound where the hyenas had once settled. She did not hurry. She did not hide. She walked into the open grass, into the full view of any animal that cared to look, and she stood there for a long moment, her silhouette dark against the last of the sky. Then she turned and walked back to the den, the same deliberate pace, and she lay down among the roots and waited to see what the night would bring. Nothing came. The insects sang. The grass whispered. The stars wheeled overhead, and the lioness lay with her head on her forelegs, her eyes half closed, listening to the cubs breathe beside her, and the savannah held her in its vast, indifferent attention. She will do this again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. She will rise at dusk, mark her line, walk her circuit, return to the den, and lie down over the small, warm bodies that are growing heavier, stronger, more certain of their place in the world. The hyenas will come again, someday, when the scent of milk rises once more, or when the cubs are old enough to wander and make mistakes. The males will come too, drawn by the smell of a female in season or the sound of young voices. The threats will change shape, but they will not disappear. This is not a story with an ending, because there is no ending for a mother in the wild. There is only the next night, and the next test, and the next breath taken against the silence. The wind shifts. The cubs sleep. The lioness raises her head and listens to the distant familiar sound of the savannah, the rustle, the drone, the low call of something hunting far away. She does not know their future any more than she knew her own. She knows only that they are alive, and that she is alive, and that the night is still young, and that the grass is still standing. She lowers her head. The dark closes in, and the long arithmetic of survival counts one more hour, one more breath, one more day held against the silence that has not yet broken.